You gotta turn it on. Is it on?
You ready? Y'all ready?
Yep.
Yeah. We're ready. Y'all ready? We're ready. Peace and love. Good afternoon now. My name is Manny Faces. I'm the founder of the Center for Hip Hop Advocacy and the creator and host of the Hip Hop Can Save America podcast. Today, I am honored to be serving as moderator for what is going to be an undoubtedly informative and inspiring panel. I'd like to introduce the folks that are on this panel. I want to run down and then we'll start talking because you don't want to hear me talk. I'll talk all day. I think I go down the order here if that's fine. We'll start with Red Summer from the National Hip Hop Museum. Simone, a performing artist who's going to be rocking, I think, at some point later on today, correct? All right. June Ambrose, creative director at Puma, and acclaimed costume designer. We got next Lance Pope from the Universal Hip Hop Museum and ASCAP. Old neighbor, as it were, Bill Stephanie, film and music producer, a bunch of things. Lawyer, right? At some point, no. And then that, come on now, let's Reggie Peters, Director of Marketing and Visitor Services at the Universal Hip Hop Museum. Star-studded panel here. So we're here talking at the whole conference about the past, present, and future of hip hop music and culture, its legacy. So to give folks an understanding how we got here, I know there's like 30 of us, so if we could just kind of, these paths can be long and winding, so if we could just try to, let's go down the line. Let people know briefly, if you could, what was your earliest connection to hip hop music and culture? And how did that parlay into a career path, which is kind of where we are now? And we can go down the line, we can start wherever you want. All right. We're going to share lights.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Red Summer. My earliest connection or my earliest memory of hip hop was I'm from Chicago, and everybody in my neighborhood hung out at the Y, right? This is what we did, keep us off the streets. And there was one time one of my neighbors came over and he needed a skull cap, like a beanie. And I don't have that. I'm a girl, So he was like, bothering everybody, trying to get this beanie. What for? What? What do you need it for? Because they were breakdancing at the Y, and he wanted, he figured out how to do this spin, and he wanted to do it. And so I went over with him to see, and it was like I had walked into magic. Like everybody in my neighborhood who was just regular cats, right? They were doing things that you can only define as magical. And I remember just really knowing at that moment that I wanted to have access to that magic and be a part of it. So I'm excited to be able to be a part of the work that I'm doing now and curating this culture.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Raina Simone again. I would say my first introduction to hip hop was Changes by Tupac and probably anything Public Enemy that my father was playing. I would say that I think my first introduction was mainly focusing on the rhythm and syncopation and identifying with culture through that in terms of African patterns and syncopation through our art, which is hip hop. And I think my second introduction to hip hop was really understanding the way poetry lays over that rhythm to create and really express and explain the Black experience through collective consciousness. So I think you have like a first awakening of hip hop and then a second awakening of hip hop. You're like, okay, this is what hip hop really is. And so once I made that connection, that's when I started to, really dive into hip hop myself and start using it as my avenue to create and express as well. It's a hard one to follow. Spoken so prolifically. I mean, I grew up in the South Bronx, home of hip hop. So that was the soundtrack to my life. I then went on to have next year a 30-year career as a costume designer in the music industry, working with some of yesterday's icons. I guess we'll talk about that later, right? Or do you want me to run it?
Give a couple.
Okay.
You know.
Jay-Z, Puffy, Missy Elliott, Nas, DMX, la la la. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, well, my name is Lance Bolton. My history in hip hop goes back to a teenager back in the 1800s. You know, there was a time where guys walked around with boom boxes and listened to cassette tapes. And those cassette tapes were music from Harlem World, for those of you who know what that is. And that was probably my first introduction to it, just seeing guys walking in the boxes. And we would just sit in front of the building, just listen to tapes all day. So that led me into a career at ASCAP, which I stayed here for 22 years and worked with pretty much everybody. A bit similar to Jim. And, you know, some not hip hop artists, Prince, Stevie Wonder. But my forte is in the music business, the music publishing side. And that's something that very honestly hard that many black people in because it's a long business. It's not like something that you're gonna learn in a year or two. You learn it in 5, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And then I learned from people who were there 10, 20, 15 years before me. So my range goes back to 50s, 60s, 70s, up to current, and you know, kind of see where it's going. But you know, I don't want to be long-winded. I'll let the next brother speak. That's me. That's fine.
I'm Bill Stephanie, and I think I have a background similar to everybody here. You know, my connection experience to hip hop goes to the time when James Boy would have you in that experience from Bronx, Long Island, and Brooklyn. My grandmother was in Soundview Houses, which is in the Bronx. And I'd say the first DJs I heard were around 74, 75, I was 11. Then growing up in Long Island, saw my first MC when I was 15. Then later on went to college at Delphi University where I met my college classmate Chuck D. Went from there to work at Def Jam, supporting the president of Def Jam, and back to my college classmates and started being called public. So that's pretty much the beginning of that.
Hello, everybody. My name is Reggie Peters, and I'm kind of like a chameleon in this business. I've worn a lot of hats, but the first thing that introduced me to hip hop professionally, I'm a b-boy to the core. I'm a b-boy, I'm a poet, and I'm a singer. Late 1970s and 1980s, there weren't that many of us that could do all of those things well. Actually sing harmonies and sing chords and vocal arrangements, put some poetry to music more than just 4x4 time, really some poetry to music, and then actually go into the cipher and battle and kick somebody down and embarrass them. So since I had a musical theater background, I was able to travel around the world in areas where hip hop wasn't welcome. Like my first tour, I was in opera houses, theaters, mini mansions, expensive yachts. I wasn't performing in the playgrounds and the clubs where the music and the culture was really prominent. I was exposed to a white world of people who knew nothing about us, who wanted to seriously exploit us, and they started making feature films about us and documentaries all over the world. I saw how Japan became a part of hip hop. My crew was the first crew to go to Japan and bring breaking over there. So I understand how this culture grew around the world and the importance of us documenting it. So throughout my career, whether it was when I was an artist at Uptown Records or at A&R Man at Harrison Records, or doing street promotions, promoting records for other labels in the clubs, going to DJs, whatever it was, I understood the importance of documenting this history and doing a lot of storytelling to keep the record straight and to keep the culture owned by who created it, which is Black and brown. A lot of times they ask me questions about, can I get into radio? How do I get into video? How do I get into television? You know, it's a plethora of information that's being asked for and given out. So my day-to-day is really spending time sharing that information and kind of pointing people in the right direction and making sure that they have something from a historical point of view to stand on. So they feel knowledgeable, so they feel empowered, so they feel connected. So when they're speaking about what they're doing, it's associated with something greater than them that's come before. That's very important. You're not in a vacuum. This isn't yours, ladies and gentlemen. We did this 40, 50 years ago. That's what this whole Hip Hop 50 is about. So if you're not willing to take the time to absorb all of that information and all of that culture, and all of that richness, how are you going to build it and move the needle forward for the next thing?
Bill, what are you up to? Not the water. A dad, husband, adjunct professor at the Clive Davis School of Recorded Music at NYU. Produced a Colin Kaepernick documentary that was out. Produced at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center in last November. This is wonderful. The Jazz Faces Christian Bride actually came up with the idea to refuse the jazz that he came up with. Roots, along with spoken word and MCs. So we have Black Thought, Yes, Bay, so it's deaf speech from Arrested Development. Mayor Ross Baraka, who he's not a mayor, he's descendant of great poetry. Some of us do know. Giovanni did it at, and the Last Poets did it at MJ and sold out. So we're in the midst of doing that again in November. And I get called to be on all sorts of podcasts, documentaries of the Mexico documentary. So WABC has documentary on Hip Hop 50 this Friday and Sunday. This trying to spread the love.
Still have clients that I have from ASCAP, so that's about 10 people that manage the catalogs. And then for the museum, I handle a membership, so if you go to www.richhn.org/membership, you'll see what we currently have set up, and you can join. It entitles you to certain benefits. So I suggest you take advantage of before the actual main museum opens, because it's gonna change.
It's tomorrow's price.
Yeah, it's gonna go away at today's price. Tomorrow's price is not, yeah, so it's gonna change. So that's probably pretty much what I want.
I actually am having the pleasure of going down memory lane and, talking about my contribution to the hip hop culture, which has been really refreshing because when I started years ago, there was a famine of females. So it's really, I find myself to be one and two of the only females in the room. But our contribution is very significant. So I've been participating in documentaries as well and sitting on podcasts and talking about what the contribution was. And working with Puma, I was really able to connect streetwear and hip hop culture to sports and style And that's been really important, kind of really helping to understand the cultural relevancy of the origin of which it came from. And last year we had the opportunity of bringing Puma to the runway for New York Fashion Week. And really it was a culmination of like my contribution to music videos and really attaching the streetwear and fashion style and high fashion to the athletic sports space and owning it. And I didn't realize that's what was happening until after I looked at the show in its entirety. I was like, wow, I did something that was probably bigger than myself. It's always been bigger than myself, actually. When I started working in hip hop as a costume designer and stylist, I knew that it was bigger than me. I really wanted to change the narrative. I really wanted to elevate the conversation. I really wanted to put us in spaces and places that we weren't actually seen. And the big goal at the time was, how do we get Black music played on MTV and VH1? Because, you know, our music videos were only played on Ralph McDaniels, and it was only being played, you know, in BET. So, our goal was like, how do we get Black faces in spaces, you know, they don't see? So my idea was to, you know, change the narrative. I put looks to the lyrics that were unexpected and but very authentic to who I thought we were, which was royal and regal and elevated and high fashion and imaginative. And I love hearing that we're constantly using the word poets, because growing up, that's how I felt. That's how I looked at the genre and the art form. It was poetic. You know, I too was able to listen to the ciphers, and you know, you battled out a beef verbally, you know, and that's how things got resolved. You know, it was through out of dance, through beat battles, and you know, I put all of those culminating art forms into a visual look. And I think that became my superpower narrative, because I wasn't dressing it the way we saw it in our environment. I was dressing it the way I saw it in its elevated state. When you look at the movie Belly, I was a costume designer in the movie Belly, which is a cult following right now. But we were forecasting, you know, what hip hop would look like 10 and 20 years later. And we're living in the future. This is future great. I am literally seeing the results of what we planted years ago, the seeds that we planted, how we merged high fashion with urban wear, how we got, you know, high fashion design houses to look at us not just as muses, but as partners. We didn't ask for permission. We took creative license very early. You know, I didn't have social media to draw a reference from. No one could cancel me. So I literally did what I wanted to do. There was no cancel culture. You know, and some of the imagery that we put out was very provocative. And it was definitely against the grain, and definitely, but it came from somewhere. I stood on the backs of, you know, rock and roll artists, Bootsy Collins, and all those kind of like, you know, artists that were doing things that definitely didn't say hip hop. But I thought hip hop was just that. There was no visual limits to it in terms of like gender fluidity. That was happening, you know, shirtless moments, leather pants, all that kind of stuff. Who heard those guys? You know, so it's not new. We just reimagined it from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to now. You know, when you're seeing the current artists in the state that they are, I mean, this is all a point of reference. So I built my careers on the backs of Black, beautiful kings and queens. I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And we're going to continue to evolve and, you know, explore opportunities that are far beyond us. So like you said, the people in this room can carry the torch to the next 50 years. We'll do it again. So I see some familiar faces. I know some new faces too. I mean, it is freshman week. But I was a pandemic class. So I would say I'm freshly upstanding. But I would say I'm a fresh full-time musician. I couldn't really, you know, put all of my attention and focus into it until I graduated. And so I guess the question is a little bit different for me. I guess what I've been doing recently is kind of what I've been doing in general. As of recent, we've done Sway's Universe, Sway in the Morning. We've done On the Radar with Gabe P, Bars on 995. The most recent song that we just released is a song called Minority Report with Talib Kweli and Ransom. What else have I done? There's a lot going on, but you know, shows, performances, things of that sort. But long story short, what I wanted to say is, you know, I started on a long government track at Howard University. And I think that was a perfect segue just because I felt like I saw myself as the future of hip hop. And it was that important to me that I wanted to make sure that that's where my energy was going. So, all the legislation that I would have written, all of, the legal counsel that I would have I now put that in music. And so I'm hoping that people still get that message, or still understanding the legislation that I would have been pushing for. But I'm actually realizing that, there's actually kind of a larger platform, a larger audience when you are able to say it through art. So that's the beauty I'm finding in this process.
An arts educator and academic. I love like history and learning. So I'm here in DC, and I'm, our major office, I guess, is across the street at this division, which is the longest running hip hop studio here in DC. And so I really by accident came across the museum. And I even have to say, when I came across this division, there was no National Hip Hop Museum. I was coming from, graduating from Georgia State with a museum studies degree, and I really didn't know what to do with it because there were not a lot of spaces. I don't think African American Museum was even open yet. I think they had just done the groundbreaking when I moved here, and I was kind of like, okay, like what's my next step? And the owner of this division had a really deep collection of hip hop memorabilia. And so it was kind of like, well, what are you going to do with it? Right? Well, can we put together an exhibit? And we started doing pop-ups, and we really built something that is lovely as far as creating space for people who love hip hop here in Washington, D.C. I've been able to partner with the go-go community here. We just did a big exhibit at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, which is the high school here for the arts. I'm teaching museum studies there. And so I'm in my last weeks of summer break. But I did just really enjoy the summer, getting a chance to go and represent hip hop at Essence Fest. Having an opportunity to tap into the local culture there, connecting with artists like D1 and having those conversations is amazing. We've been able to induct at this point, I think 65 artists into our Hip Hop Hall of Fame. And so meeting artists and really talking to them and learning the difference between hip hop as a culture and hip hop as an industry has been amazing for me. I think that's the part that I connected to most with hip hop as a culture. And I wasn't especially as steeped into hip hop as an industry as a lot of the panelists here. So when I get to have these conversations, I'm like, oh my God, I just want to talk to everybody. Right? Yes, absolutely. And so like my day today, we did an interview on Fox 5. I'm here with you all, and then I get to connect with some young people later on this evening.
Let me kind of piggyback off something a couple of y'all had talked about, and I guess this is maybe for June and Bill specifically. Capitalism and hip hop have always been kind of a blessing and a curse. Right? For folks like y'all who probably, I'm speaking for y'all, but my guess is often had to fight hard to get the cultural part of the culture into the industry. Not that's a fight with, the old guard as it is. What's the current state, generally speaking, of that coexistence these days? And maybe how has it changed over time? I'm sure you have something to say.
No, of course. I mean, from the inception of my career, it wasn't like I had the luxury of picking up the phone and calling a high fashion house and saying, let me look number 22 off the runway. I couldn't call Louis Vuitton. I couldn't call, everyone is doing the fabulous collaborations now and say, send, Chanel and everyone else to send me this. We had to, high fashion owes hip hop a thank you because the investment in which artists put out first to get the attention was significant. And this power that And I constantly remind people of that for so many reasons, because, you know, when you think about Kanye, what he's asking for is he's just literally asking for what belongs to, what he feels he's rightfully deserves and belongs to him. You may say it in a way that may sound a little hard to digest, but I get at the core of what he's saying. We were able to witness a Virgil Abloh. We were able to witness, Pharrell. These are significant, moments. But the work is just, it's new work. It's not that we owe them. They're doing us a favor. We're still we're still putting a lot more money in their pockets than they put in ours. So building of houses, I think, is going to be the next chapter. What I see what's happening is that we're getting inside, getting the information, and what I hope is happening, is what I'm encouraging to happen. These students understand how it works and operates, and then know that we have to come outside of that, collectively put our monies together and start to put our own houses. Because we're still going to end up just being employees of the system, the establishment.
Right.
And I think it will come 360 as like in the music industry when you start to see independent labels being born and the ownership of people understand how important their publishing is, what it is for them to not have to pay back so much to the record labels. I mean, we were doing music videos that were $50,000 to $4 million. The artists didn't understand they had to pay back. So you learn. It's a learning and an education for everyone. But I think we're a lot more smarter than we were then. I think that the awareness, and because of there's so much knowledge here, that there's no way that the next generation will feel taken advantage of, because we're sharing, the information. And AI, we have to get ahead of everything. AI is going to cause a whole disruption. I think, well, my AI is authentic intelligence. I plan on marrying that to artificial intelligence, because it's not going to go anywhere. I think that we just have to figure out a way to work together, like the musicians have learned to work with the new way of downloads and technology. So I just encourage people to get ahead of it, understanding what's happening, because it's going to affect my industry. It's affecting already design, it's affecting publishing, it's affecting television and film. It's just, we're living in the future. It's the same way we have to forecast where it's going to be 20 or 30 years from now. Literally, it's happening again. So I just encourage people to really stay ahead of that. And for us to communicate and have these kind of open conversations and share. I'm glad there are educational programs that are built around that. I mean, they didn't have styling classes at universities and styling courses, and costume design was something that was very kind of like, you did intern, and it was something that was outside of the universities, and now it's becoming part of the curriculum, which tells you that how big of an industry it's become, how economical of importance it's become. I understood our power years ago when I was building costumes and looks for music videos. That then became, consumers were asking for it at retail. So I recognized that we were doing something that was bigger than us very early. So yeah, each one teach one, and as we get information, we share it. I think it's super important to talk about it out loud.
I also dare say, because we're actual hip-hop heads, we also have this kind of superpower built in that when these changes happen in these industries, we've always pivoted, always done things against the grain. So it's like, oh, we can usually figure out a way to, around or to work with or to remix this thing that's taking over the zeitgeist. And
I forgot to mention that I was at Cross Colors and Caucanize, the marketing director for those brands. So I lived through oversaturation of the market, retail taking control of, inventory and exploding of business and brands. Why we don't have Cross Colors still is why Caucanize had to step outside and become independent, find distribution. It's the same thing that happened, I think, in the music world. So I mean, I've lived to see the rise and fall and the beginnings of the next chapter of it all as it relates to music and fashion.
Yeah. Bill, again, the same kind of questions for working with corporations, working with,
Yeah, sure. These are necessary evils that we deal with, but also sometimes necessary assets too. And we tend to less use the term capitalism and really focus on entrepreneurship, innovation. Because I think at the core of the beginning of hip hop or whatever it was that was very early 70s, that it is all underscored by incredible invention. They're just coming up with just the notion, going to the park and trying to figure out, well, where am I going to get electricity? There's a light bulb. How am I going to figure out how to transfer that electricity to these turntables, into this mixer? So to have young people that so intentionally innovative 50 years ago, use that as the foundation for an entire industry and culture to which we fast forward 50 years. And at this very moment, Paramount, the company, the large entity, is about to sell BET, Black Entertainment Television, basically for somewhere between $1 billion to $3 billion to a number of prospective suitors that include everybody from Tyler Perry to Huffy, the former student of Howard University. And that's an incredible statement from an entrepreneurial standpoint, from a structural standpoint, from an ownership standpoint, to go from, again, using light bulbs in parks in 1975 to now Black and brown entrepreneurs having the facility, the capability of purchasing a cable network and media platform for billions of dollars. It's just incredible to think about.
But they're pulling that money together, right?
Oh yeah,
So
well,
that's-
they have to.
That's how
That's
it
all
gets
business
done.
people.
I want to speak to that too quickly. I guess more so from the artist perspective. I think entrepreneurship is very, very important, especially when it comes to our culture and community. But I will say, I think that capitalism is very dangerous for hip hop. And I think that when we look at capitalism, we have to, look at everything that goes into capitalism. One of those things being human capital. And that is something that's assessed. And so I find it problematic in the music industry, human capital is assessed almost in a similar fashion as to the slave trade. There is no Black record label right now. There are Black minor labels and Black independent labels, but there's not a Black major record label. And I think that says a lot in itself, right? Because how much of an entrepreneur can you be if there's still somebody above you who's making more, if it's your idea and your light bulb? So you got the light bulb, and now somebody else is just flicking the switch after you put everything together, and now they're getting everything. I think that's a huge problem in hip hop. And I think a lot of where we change that is consumerism. And what I mean by that is ensuring that we are supporting artists who are speaking about things that we care about, right? I feel like right now, because capitalism is also kind of taking over hip hop, similarly to other genres like we were speaking earlier in terms of country and rock and roll, you see the progression that it takes. And so that's what I kind of get worried about. You see the change of ownership. And so if you start off as an entrepreneur, you see somebody else come in and sort of take over those ideas, somebody with more and further resources to have them get a higher playing field. And then I think that's taken away from us. So that's the issue that I take. I kind of feel like hip hop at the moment right now, because of who's in charge, is a matter of for men who can coon the best and for women who can be the most of a Jezebel or a Manny figure. And to be honest with you, I think that the reason that we're allowing that to be acceptable right now is because, again, we're allowing certain consumers to dictate our culture and our music. We are not the main consumer of this content that I'm referring to. So I just want us to keep that in mind and striving to ensure that entrepreneurship translates to ownership, which translates to ensuring that no one else is owning any part of their intellectual properties.
Yeah. Part of, I think, I'm trying to segue here, check this out. But part of this is because to be able to document our past so that we know what happened, so that we can avoid the mistakes of the past. This is good.
I'm sorry, just really quickly too, I think we underestimate like the amount of resources that we have in the Black community too. There are a lot of Black and brown entrepreneurs. If we came together and invested that money accordingly, such that we put the artists that we want at the forefront, that would be an entirely different situation. But again, there is no major Black label right now. That body hasn't really been created. It's been tried with independent minor labels, but there's still not that major Black.
Let's switch back to the archiving to this work as well to get some more of their voices in here. Again, the importance isn't, we can't overstate the importance of documenting the culture, the art, everything that goes along with it. So the work that y'all doing is important. We don't have to go over all the reasons why. But there have been archives, there's been museums and archives at universities and such, but also to your point, and I want to ask this, how important is it now to be able to say, well, we're not going to be the archive at Cornell University, for example, no shade to them, they're great. But we're going to be the Universal Hip Hop Museum and Archive, or the National Hip Hop Art. It's ours now. I know what I'm doing.
Okay, I want to tell y'all a real quick story about a student, an elementary school kid that came into our pop-up exhibit, right? So I showed him a 45 record, right? A vinyl 45. And I asked him, what is that? And he said, that's a black CD. He didn't understand the concept of the 45 record, right? Now, anybody from the black community that grew up in that era know the importance of that 45 single, right? How that was playing in your mother's house, how that's what they cleaned the house to, or how you heard Marvin Gaye or Stevie Wonder or whoever, right? And even how DJs and hip hop reluctantly like to use them because they were so easy to break when you started scratching, right? So the 45 record played an important role in the development of the sound in the culture, right? That's some misinformation, right? So now if I leave that kid thinking that that 45 is a CD, how is he gonna tap into all of the richness that the 45 offers and all of the music that was born from that, right? Something that simple. Another example, I have a boombox in there. I asked the kid, how many batteries do you think it took to power that boombox? And he said, no, you just plug it in and it charges. No concept of a battery. So then I try to say to him, do you know what goes in the flashlight? The D battery in the flashlight? He said, no, the flashlight is on the phone.
Right, wow.
I say all that to say how important it is for our day-to-day stuff that we're doing to be translated to this new generation who's bombarded with information that's not important. It's a shame that we don't have the basic information about this culture translated in a way where they can thrive from using it, right? That kills me. Now, in terms of the commercialism of it, everything is paid for. Everything you hear on the radio, somebody paid for that. So if you're complaining that there's too much gangster on the radio, there's somebody that had enough money to make that happen. If you're complaining that there's too much misogyny on the radio or on television, there's an organization that put a lot of money behind that because they believe that that's what we want to consume, right? So we may not be able to control what's on the airwaves because we don't have the dollars to control it. That's why there's no black major companies, because nobody wants to invest in consciousness, in knowledge-based information, in the real richness of our people. They want to exploit it, but they don't want to invest in it. And we get caught up in this supply and demand chain saying, well, this is what the people want, so this is what I'm gonna produce. So now our women are selling themselves for $2 to nothing, right? Our men are talking about stuff that's so detrimental to the future of young boys. We have all these identity and gender issues now, and there's no voice of the people that's saying, listen, you need to be educated, articulate, professional, resourceful, upscale, promising, adventurous. You know, we're talking about all of the downtrodden, the negativity, the ignorance, the foolishness, the dangers of society, the drugs of society, and all of that. But nobody is saying, hey, let's do what we did in the 1980s. Let's be conscious about this music in our form. Let's be calculated about what we put out there. If the gatekeepers are going to allow the smut to come out, we have to be our own gatekeepers and control the narrative and control the storytelling and teach our children that there's more to life than what they see on social media and on music videos. There's a bigger world out there that we have to expose our youth to give them a foundation to be better than everything we see. Does that make sense?
When you were speaking, I thought about the concept that right now it is possible for a child to aspire to work at a hip hop studio, right? There are now, two and more coming that young people can aspire to. That was not the case 10, 15 years ago, right? And so as a lot of my work is preserving the past, I also have to keep the concept of being a visionary and being able to look forward and having like your finger on the pulse of what is going to be happening and being prepared to tell those stories, to do that work. Museum work is also science, right? If I get an object, I have a leather jacket from our video from Fabulous. It has spoons and forks in it. Well, if you understand what happens scientifically when metal is in contact with leather and the air and moisture, right? There's a science behind preserving those kinds of objects. So in my work in education, like that's my thing, is to make sure that young people know that there's so much available to you in this industry, in museum work, in hip hop as a culture, in hip hop as an industry, and in taking what they're creating now and making sure that this is preserved for people 50 years from now.
Can we expand on that? Anyone else has a perspective of this is like an emerging opportunity, right? For folks either, I can do hip hop, but don't have to be an artist.
Yeah.
I could still do it as an educator. I could still do it as a mental health professionals now, utilizing hip hop in their services, museum work. What other, in your experiences, what other, emerging opportunities like that?
There are tons. Well, let me put it to you like this. The music business really is three businesses.
Yeah.
It's business of music, that's ASCAP, TMI, it's PROs, that's your attorneys, that's your anything that goes into actually the paperwork, copyright, anything that goes into the actual business, what people don't think about. There are tons of jobs in that. Then there's show business. Show businesses, June and Mark, they make the music business look beautiful. That's show business. And there are tons of opportunities in just show business that you can take advantage of. You could be an artist who just does covers in Las Vegas and make a living, a decent living. House, show business. Then there's the record business. Most people confuse the music business for the record business. So that's why it's so much confusion, because when you're thinking about the music business, you're actually talking about the record business. So when you say there are no black record business, you're absolutely right. Major. But it's written, see, because I know publishing so far back, I know when no black people, no one had publishing. No one, it was not even a conversation. And I can guarantee you, in every record deal, there's a clause in there that says, primarily, the record company has the right to exploit and to distribute your name and likeness in perpetuity or whatever, right? And all that is publishing.
Right.
That's your publishing, because publishing is simple. It's the controlling interest on the song. So in the event someone wants to use that song for some type of licensing purpose, they contact the publisher. They don't contact the writer. In my career, my 20-year span, I watched ASCAP's publishing go from 10,000, 20,000 publishing records to about 300,000. And that was due to me. Because I was telling everybody, it's free. Join as a writer and a publisher. It's not gonna hurt you. It's not gonna hurt you. Then when I explained the difference, it gave them at least the leverage to say, hey, I own my own publisher. Even though 95% of them don't even know what that means. But to have it is to have the controlling interest on the work. And that's what I think you're talking about, right? Having the ownership. But having the ownership and not having the finances behind it is like useless. So that's why we always end up in, with the biggest buyer coming in and saying, hey, just think about it. Every record label that you can think of, from Bad Boy to Rockefeller, all are controlled by really 3 or 4. Warner, Universal, EMI, BMG. Those are they're 3 or 4, they're about 5 big ones. And Sony. And all of those little labels all fall under that in some way. They all lead back to the same pot. Because that's the money source, that's the bank. And that's what ASCAP was. That's what ASCAP is. It's a collection agency that collects on behalf of artists. So my experience with artists has been very different from most people. I believe in human capital. So that's why I was able to stay around so long. Because the most important people are the members. Because they're the reason I'm at work. So if they need something from anything, they can leave a letter to their landlord saying, hey, I got a check coming, or I'm in good standing. Whatever, I got you. Use your power to do what you can to help us. Because that's really what it's about. That's the reason we have power.
I'd like to add to that. I've always considered myself an artist, and as I'm looking out into the room, I'm looking at IPs. You're all intellectual properties. I've never given that right away. June Ambrose is a trademark name because of that. My art and costumes that I've designed, I've never signed over the rights to my IP. That's my creativity. I own that. So he said something very provocative, and I just want to share that with you all because we're all considered IPs. I've always considered myself to be the CEO of my life. I started off in finance and investment banking, so understanding financial literacy and also reading the fine print was something that was very important to me. My partner, my husband, reminds me of that every day when we're looking at the fine print and they want you to sign off your image and likeness in perpetuity. There's no such thing. So, I just want you guys to read the fine print.
Y'all got jam. You got any jam?
And also, I want to respond as well. I do think that, again, I still don't necessarily believe in the principle of human capital. I think wherever human capital is calculated, it's going to automatically be flawed. That's just my own opinion. And publishing, of course, is very, very important. But of course, if you don't have opportunities for sync placements and that's not really going anywhere, you're still missing out on revenue that you could be getting. And then you're still not having, another record deal to be able to take the place of that in somebody else. But also in terms of other things that can also be done in hip hop, and one thing that I've been doing for a very long time is just like the engineering and science behind music design. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean in terms of like sound waves and individual sounds, in terms of like, if you want to make a certain kick drum, you want to make it sound a certain way, or even like plugins, right? So like coding equalizers and compressors and things of that sort. So that's also a huge area that we really need a lot of Black and brown people in. Because again, AI is on the horizon, well, it's here now. And in many ways, the artificial intelligence, well, the patterns based on artificial intelligence that these AI machines are coming up with, of course, are based on the information that's inputted into them. And it's just feeding it back to you. Right. And so essentially, if it's a whole bunch of white culture putting into what music is supposed to look like in hip hop in the next 20 years, you can imagine how that might not turn out the same way as if it were us doing the coding and putting our own rhythm and sound into what we want hip hop to sound like in 30 years. So again, just another area that's very important, the science and engineering of music and sound design.
Yeah.
that I want to, I guess maybe issue a challenge. A lot of the things that we're talking about is connected to supply and demand, right? And you all can do something, and I'm saying you all, like the students here at Howard, you all can do something really amazing if you take the opportunities that are presented within hip hop here for you. If events that are hip hop based are sold out, if classes that are hip hop based have wait lists, right? If we are able to show that there is a genuine interest in the culture and what we are producing, I think the mindset gets to shift, right? I'm a HBC graduate. I understand that a lot of times our focus is the past, right? Is the classics, is the canon. But at this point, we're talking about something that started 50 years ago. And so we can make that demand that there is more of that that is available for us in institutions that represent us for the culture that was created by us. And so I just wanted to kind of issue that challenge for you all, make sure that you all are making space for that on your campus and any opportunity that you have.
Yes. Leave a little time. Leave a little time for Q&A. I just have one more question. Again, this is for everybody down the line. It actually segues nicely from what you just said. This is a past, present, and future panel. We're in the middle of Hip Hop 50. We're celebrating the past, archiving all the back in the day stuff. And the celebrations and the recognitions are great. A lot of people getting their flowers, a lot of people still being left out, a lot of artistic aspects of the culture not being properly celebrated. And so it's another talk. We get to do that. So going down the list very quickly so we get some Q&A. What would you like to see for the future of hip hop? 5, 10, the next 50 years? Just generally speaking, what would you like to see? Want to go?
All right, I'll go. I'll be quick. I
don't want you to
What I would like to see in hip hop for the next 50 years is a reset, a restart. What we did for the past 50 years is great. It's phenomenal. It's put some of us into tax brackets that we couldn't imagine 20, 30 years ago. But it's still an anomaly. It's not the norm. The next 50 years, this should be a structured career path, just like medicine, just like law, just like architecture. It should just be a given that if you follow this blueprint, you will end up successful, not just in the art form or the business, but as a human being. You should be a better individual. This is a culture that we created from nothing. And there was a lot of depravity in that. We want to be flourishing. We want to be affluent. We want to be excellent. So to do that, you have to take this information and reinvent it like Area 51. You get to Area 51, it's Area 51. You start from the beginning and you create something based on what your experiences in life were, whether it was the COVID pandemic, or the crack epidemic, or the fentanyl, or the gender and identity that you're faced with. You have your own issues that require its own storytelling. Whether any form of expression that you choose, it requires your voice. We cannot speak to that. We can speak from the outside, but we're not living it. You have to elect another Black president, even if he's coming out of the classroom right now. Find him or her. I prefer it be her, but find her. Create a world that you want to live in because you have access to reach people around the world. So you should be thinking on a global level, and you should be thinking as a collective, and you should be using hip hop as entry level to catapult yourself to the next level. Don't leave it where it is. Don't follow the footsteps of the people in the past, because even though they're on top, they make mistakes. I want you to be like Tupac, but I don't want you to be like Tupac. So you have to find balance in that. You have to know what the good is, what the bad is, and what works for you. Right?
I would like, in ingenuity. I feel like the foundational hip hop that we are preserving right now is when you have to tap into the life code. And you have to figure out how to make something from the records that your parents had because they took music classes out of the school. And the expression was, it was intimate, it was meaningful because it was personal. It was someone's true story. Right now, you have 15 artists who sound exactly the same because they're making work that sold once and they're being told that it will sell again if you do it the exact same way. So there's very little variety on the mainstream. We started off where like the music that we heard on the radio was the powerful, like really positive music. And if you wanted to hear the better stuff, you have to get that tape, right? You have to go to the underground. Now it's flipped. And if you want to find some inspirational music, something that's going to make you like go on another day, you got to go to the underground to go find that, right? And if we tap back into that concept of supply and demand, and we put a lot more of our clicks, that's really where it is now, right? If we put a lot more of our time and our clicks and our views on people who are supporting this new concept of being just different, being unique from the person next to them, then we have an opportunity to create an art community, an art body of work that is
a more female diverse group of voices. I'm really excited about what's going to come out of your mouth. I mean, with so much intelligence, authentic intelligence, your AI is incredible already. I'm really excited for the future of females in the industry and what's going to come. Diverse group of voices, I think, is what I look forward to.
Thank you. Mentioned something that you said earlier. Let's have that major black distribution, publishing, all encompass. You know, it's funny. Some years ago, I was in talks of doing, I worked for ASCAP, of doing a blast app, so to speak, right? And it was hard because you just couldn't get those main players to come together. And I think that's an experience, you know, I don't want to sound Debbie Downer, you know, but, you know, I would like to see in the future that correct, you know, us really go back to an appreciation for one another and respect. And then that will bring about love. You know, I had a funny experience where a guy said to me, "Oh, I don't like you." I said, that's okay. Still gonna help you to the best of my ability. And eventually you're gonna love me. And eventually he did, you know, like that, he followed me around. Right? But you know, it goes back to that old cliche. Kindness kills hate. So that's what I would like to see more in the next 50 years. I would like to see us just come together and form something that's never been done before. Because we have every opportunity. Everything is a first for us.
People said, get more of a sugar than shit.
Bill, and then we'll let our headliner take us out.
Yeah, I think everybody said it all here. I would say that hip hop at 50 years old should be innovative enough to the point where it retires for whatever else is going. Because if you were around in 1973, when there was hip hop, it was dance music, group music, you know, love is the message, and the SB, that was hip hop to us. But the young people heard something else and decided to reinterpret those sounds, those bass lines, those grooves into something new. Far different from what I guess MFSB and everybody else was creating stuff at that point from what we should not be afraid to take the next step. And I think sometimes I see in our reverence for hip hop, which is fine, fantastic. But the history of Black music actually is progression.
Yeah.
Of going from the Juba rhymes actually during enslavement, going into James Reese Europe at the end of, go back to Black musician schools in college. James Reese Europe at the beginning of the 20th century, going into Louis Armstrong, going into Fletcher Henderson, going into Big Mama Thornton, going into Chuck Berry. We were all part of the continuum. It should not stop here. It can't stop. So that's sort of what I worry about, that the tradition of continuous innovation gets stopped by our absolute idolatry for what hip hop has been and continues to be.
I just have to say one thing.
No, I
You
guess-
touched on something really
Yeah.
important. And even the samples that were Apache, for example, right? A German record. You're like, wait a minute. Sharon 4. Transship Express. Like these records were good. To be honest, they're white records. But we scratched them, we mixed them, we made them something different. So he's absolutely right. That's why hip hop is really on top, because it really started from everything else. Because all we have is a turntable and a turntable and scratching, so and a mixer rather. So I just wanted to make that point.
It's like Grandmaster Caz says in all the rap, how hip hop didn't invent anything, but it reinvented everything. And so that should continue moving forward. Right on. I have you on it too.
Amen.
Take us home.
No pressure. Just briefly, very quickly. I know it seems like because I'm sitting up here in the sheepy with the Afro Club that I only listen to conscious music. That's really not the case, you know? And so, but don't get me wrong, I also have a very intense appreciation for music with message and with purpose. And so really, in the next 50 years, I would just like to see balance. I would like to stop seeing this idea of such a monolithic idea of what a Black individual is, you know? The Pan-Africanists, you know, everything that derives from the African continent, we're such an eclectic people, and there's so many different varieties of us in terms of characteristic and, you know, physicality. So just more balance. If we're gonna have, you know, one type of music, niggas talking about killing each other, okay, some people are like that, but there are also a whole bunch of people who are not. So let's make sure that we're exactly, you know, let's make sure that that's equal. We're saying balance, and not just, you know, what the position in power wants us to see, which is the most negative Black caricature of Black person you can get. I'll stop it. Balance. And also just really quickly, I think that we've seen, you know, creativity comes from not having Black. You know, when you don't have, you have to make. But Black America and Brown America in general has progressed over time too. And I think we don't necessarily give that enough credit. We still have a very far way to go, but economically we have, you know, gotten a little farther than we were in the 70s. And so now I'd like to see what creativity looks like once you do have it. And you know, that's something that's very powerful too. We are still a creative people, even when we do have. So what does that look like? And can we make it such that it's a balance so that we're still hearing what creativity sounds like for those who don't have and do have, but they can cohesively bring it together to show the true Black experience.
I promise Q&A. Anyone got any questions on this film? Because I told you first.
Thank you. Geneva Green, I'm a PhD student here at Howard. My question is for Jim. I'm a fan of Project Runway, and currently there are 5 Black designers, and several of which are hip hop designers representing, you know, different parts of the world, which I think is fabulous. I'm really enjoying it right now. But I wanted to understand from you, on that kind of platform, what do you think that kind of acknowledgement means for hip hop fashion?
Black designers on mainstream fashion competition shows?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Okay.
I mean, it's TV. I mean, those designers, they do this and most of them, if you're not Kristen Siriano, you're done with the show and you're looking for funding. I mean, it's a rough business. You need education and funding is one of the key things to sustaining with designers, getting into the marketplace in a way that they can sustain. You need distribution, you need production, you need money. And you do these shows, you get a little fee, you're popular, and then after the show, you gotta find a home. So it really doesn't mean anything. I mean, you know, we are utilizing our direct-to-consumer platforms, I think, are our superpowers, our, you know, grassroots marketing. I think for designers, educating yourself and making sure your product is one that consumers want to consume. I think that's super important. And also just finding partners, financial partnerships, which there's tons of private equity money out there that, you know, and grants and funds that people don't tap into, that that going unused, but they should.
My name is Malcolm Ali Mason, Harvard University class of 2015. My question is for Ms. Raina Simone. With your history in politics, is your approach to music your authentic emotions, or is it an intentional psychological approach to the subconscious mind of the audience you see?
For sure, I love that question. I would say I'm always very intentional. I think that when expression is real, it's going to come from the subconscious state as well, if it's true expression. So that's how I see it. In regard to politics and music, of course, I think when you're discussing politics, it has a lot to do with fact. And of course, that's rooted in opinion-based things too. So, did that answer the question properly?
Your authentic emotions or an intentional psychological programming of the subconscious mind of your target?
So I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of both. I think if you're truly a conscious person, you're always going to be tapped into your subconscious as well. So that's why I say, you know, I think it's an innate emotion that's going to also come from the subconscious state. Sometimes we act on things without even knowing, but that's because there's an emotion that we feel.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yep.
No, ain't no 10.
No. All right. I hate doing this because I didn't see who was next up. Back in first. So back in the first, and then forward to you, ma'am, and then we'll come up here. Yeah, you. Yeah.
This is a question for the whole panel. I'm about to walk around the piano station. I want to, immerse myself in the music industry. I clearly was not born pop, but I want to immerse myself in this. To know what does hip-hop mean to you? Questions about what is hip-hop? What does it mean to you? And so I answer questions like, what was it growing up? Even now, what is it to you? Because I want to make music to the song. Follow tradition and classic.
First of all, since you have a classical background, we can have this conversation because I have to say this for people that are musically literate, right? Hip hop music has its own language, which is very different. It's a dialect of the traditional Italian music language, right? Some words mean the same thing, some words are synonyms, and some words are just totally different in meaning, right? So something like as simple as a bar for you in music is numerical, right? To someone in hip hop, that same word bar is a portion of their vocal performance verse, right? So being able to translate traditional Italian music language to the music language of the DJs and the producers and the rappers, and fusing that language will create a whole new environment for creativity where you can actually do fusions of classical music with hip hop. I do that all the time with gospel, jazz, blues, and classical singers and musicians. Actually, we have a Metropolitan Opera singer musician right in this room right now. Stand up, Charles. Where are you? Up, right behind you. So something like what you would call a B section, right? You know what a B section is in your music, right? That's a bridge, that's a change, right? To us, we call that a break, right? A drum solo in music is what we call it. But to a DJ, that's the part of the record that he repeats. That's the break part, right? For the B-boy, right? The drum solo. So communicating those languages, if I were you, I would specialize in that because there's a need for that and it will reflect in the studio. The engineers have a language, the rappers have a language, the traditional musician has a language, and they're all dialects to this original Italian. If you master those languages, you will in turn master that creative space, and new and improved music will come out of it. That's the best I can do.
Good afternoon. My question is in reference to capitalism and hip hop, and it's open to whoever would like to answer it. Do you believe in order to effectively shift the economic state of hip hop, other elements of culture would also have to simultaneously shift? And if so, what are those elements and how would they need to shift?
Want that?
I would tap a piece of it. Let me make sure I'm answering the question. What elements in capitalism would?
So music is an element of culture, right? That's one part of our culture. And we were talking, well, you guys were talking about change and ownership and changing the dynamic of hip hop. That's just one element of our culture that we could change. But if you would need to change other elements within our culture in order to make that shift in its entirety. So I'm asking you all, you have fashion out there, you have clothing, that's another element of culture, okay? Religion is another element of culture. Government is another element of culture. What other elements of culture would need to change in order for an effective permanent change to occur as far as when it comes to the economics of hip hop and ownership?
Yeah. It's financial literacy. It's putting value on things that actually have value. It's, you know, we talk about designers and even I like to watch a lot of African movies. You know, they're wearing Gucci, they're wearing Santiago, like why? You understand? Like I have on no jewelry, like I'm good, you know, 2 houses, 2 cars, 4 cars, like what's important? Like what do you really need? Like gold chain for what? You know, like I'm wearing $250,000 on my neck, $100,000 on my finger. Like, why? Invest that money. So it's financial literacy. That's what has to change.
I know.
And generational wealth, like creating it. Like we come from it's funny when you ask the question about what we want to do 50 years down the line. My first impulse was, man, I'm just trying to get past this moment. Because that's where most folks are. Yeah. Like we're so engrossed in day to day, just trying to get past this week to get to payday, that we can't even think about 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now. So that's what needs to change, like our mindset of what's actually really important. Like, what do you really need? I don't need 15 rooms. I don't need 10 bathrooms. I've got one bathroom.
Okay. I want to get this last question in. I know I'm not a panelist, but let me say this. It's another thing or two. I think a thing or two. Everything, right? For hip hop to lead the change to affect all of these industries, hip hop has to be in government. Hip hop has to be in administration in schools. Hip hop has to be the director of hospitals. Hip hop has to be on media. Like it's us, y'all, you know, with that mindset, that ethos, that different way of seeing the world, that way of you know, coming in back door, putting the electricity in the light bulb. That mindset is baked in to y'all and the hip hop generation, people came up like that. By getting in those positions, which is kind of the goal, then you don't have to fight so hard for a minor at Howard, right? You can just snap your fingers and make it happen. And then that economic, I don't want to say trickles down, it's not the right way to say it, but it opens up all those opportunities in all those different areas. That's just my 2 cents. I just want to get.
Let me touch on that one point.
Yes, well, we kind of want to get one more question.
Let me just say one more thing.
Yes, sir.
This lady right here.
I know, I took a few of your seconds for that.
The most important thing that we need to add to this culture is health and wellness. If you're not here, you can't do anything. Diet, water, air, substance abuse. We have to be as healthy and as conscious and as creative as we can be to survive the pitfalls that come with this business. That's all I have to say.
And everything else
I just
around
want to add
you.
very
Like,
quickly,
yes.
dismantling the stronghold of white supremacy has on our community. As long as we give power and then we continue to recreate the structures that are already there, we're gonna create the same products. And so if we can start to work on dismantling that, and we can create anything and
I have to respond to that really quickly too.
Look at you.
I just want to say very quickly, and the reason why I always stress how problematic I think human capital is like, again, right? In any part of our community in which human capital is going to be factored, it's automatically going to be a problem, whether that's religion or anything else you mentioned, right? For instance, in religion, we don't necessarily say, okay, the preacher is going to get, it's more or less based on the congregation, right? It's not like, okay, we value this preacher this much, so we're going to give him $1 million. Whereas in sports and music, that's essentially what it is. I think that's where the main problem comes in, because now you're selling people in accordance to a price that you're assigning to them, and who tells you that you can assign somebody else a price based on how you see them as valuable? And of course, that's being done by a higher up. But I think that's the piece that really causes the most issue, because from that is where, like, everything, I don't have time to fully go into it, but if we can talk after, I would love to.
Last question. Da-da-da.
So my name is Troy White, and I'm a senior strategic legal management communications major and philosophy minor here at Howard. I'm a member of the scholarship fellow of the Warner Music Robotics Center for Music Business. And so my question is primarily to Ms. Raina, Simone, and Ms. Ambrose. You guys spoke a lot, and actually that last question led up so perfectly. I appreciate you for that. Because you guys started talking about the dangers of capitalism in hip hop. And so my question is, because it seems like we're all kind of dancing around the topic, right? At the end of the day, the core consumer isn't us, right? And that's kind of the issue, because you look at a famous DMX video of him at Woodstock, and it's him on stage and 1 million white people in the crowd. That is your primary consumer. That is who's dictating what's important in regards to the bottom line. So my question is, how do we change that aspect of hip hop in order to actually change the content? Because the reality is that hip hop is a business, right? So you guys are you guys know about content. You guys have years of experience in content, and you know that you base your product on what the consumer likes. And since the consumer isn't us, and it's some kid in the suburbs who wants to get away from that, and he comes to the festival in this Larry Bird concert, and he wants to say the N-word in peace. That's your primary consumer. So yeah, how do we fix that so we can fix the content?
I think I think we kind of have to start at home with decolonizing our minds, and that's the way that I used to think, which actually prevented me from doing more conscious or socio-political music for a long time. And then I realized we are not the minority in this world. They are. You know, people of color are the majority in this world, right? So if you look at it in terms of a national lens, yeah, now they're the majority, yeah, okay, now if you're, you know, in interest in making money, you might be trying to appease that white majority in America. But that is, music and hip hop now has gotten to a global level, where you no longer need to solely calculate what's going on in America. So again, they're the minority, we're the majority. We actually have a lot more power than we think in terms of, you know, consumerism and our dollars if we're looking outside of America. And I'm not just talking about the African continent, I'm talking about parts of South Asia, and, you know, there are so many different parts and compartments that we can really tap into.
Yeah. You good? Good?
We got
No, you can.
I mean, it's complicated, you know, because we're 15%. And but then you look at a glass of water and you say, is the glass half full? And, you know, you have all these analogies if you want to compare it to that kind of situation. But, you know, we create the music and we create the imagery, not just for us. You know, you putting black faces and white spaces, because we're 15%, we grow, right? We grow because we did. We're not, I don't think we're consciously thinking about it because we're creating art. So I don't put color to the art. I'm black and I'm proud, but I don't make things just for black people. I don't make it for just one I make it, you know, I make it as, because art should be consumed by all, right? So when people say, oh, Oprah, she's colorless, and think about people who have crossed over, because the music genre for the relatability, you know, we created it to be relatable to all. So the power is in the fact that we are speaking a language that is universal. And isn't that the goal?
Yes.
Right? Isn't that how we grow? Okay.
Let me say something. And then we're done. Now, in terms of the fan or the consumer being other than black people now, right? That's fine. But let's be clear. The inventors and the creators of this culture are black and brown people telling stories of black and brown experiences. So although there's white people out there in the audience, they're coming to get something from the black and brown experience. So as long as you keep yourself true to who you are in that experience, you will always have someone outside of that inquisitive enough to buy in. Does that make sense? White people are not there because we're imitating them. They're there because we're authentic in our space. That's who we are. And if you look at some of the most successful artists that we have in hip hop, they have been true to their own identity without selling themselves short trying to appease other people. Jay-Z don't look Chinese. Right. Jay-Z don't look white on no day. On no level, not coming out of Marcy, not in $1 billion boardroom. He's just as black as he was from day one. Puffy the same. Revolt Television was a counterculture creative space. It wasn't to be like the rest of the media. It's called Revolt. Right? So he's being as black as he can be. And white people that are interested in that black experience buy in. That's why these concerts are full of white people, because they want a minuscule feel of what it's like to be us. And we are beautiful.
All right.
We gotta wrap up. We gotta wrap it up. Yeah.
Listen. In the spirit of hip hop, make some noise.